Welcome back to Offroad Outlaws, y'all, and in this video, we're going to be talking about some of y'all's recent comments as to what you might want to see in the next update, as well as some of the rumors and speculations that I've also seen kind of floating around in the community. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of focus on No Limit lately with the recent update, and there are still tunes out there that are getting faster and faster and faster as people learn the new tuning style for the latest update. But this is all about Offroad Outlaws, so that's what we're going to focus on today. And as we go through the topics in this video, we're also going to be working on a couple of individual builds in the background. The first one we're going to do is the Cat Eye, because we're converting it over from the drag racing setup it was on before to a little bit more of a Baja-esque setup. Now, this Baja setup is a little odd though, because it's a low travel Baja setup. So we're going to do a lot of drop testing and messing around with damping settings and stuff like that. And then we're also going to be messing with a Baja bug. And then once we're done setting them up, we're going to take them out to a couple of different maps and just kind of see how they do while talking about everything that we have on the list today. Now, since we haven't talked about the Offroad Outlaws update feature in quite a while, I think it's important to establish a baseline of a lot of the different topics that we have already covered in prior videos and prior live streams, but also important to cover a lot of the features that y'all have suggested in the comments over time. Now, one feature that was talked about a lot in prior videos and live streams was movable exhaust stacks in the beds of trucks, because some of the stacks have very odd positions where they might be all the way to one side of the bed or all the way to the other side of the bed versus being slightly offset from center, which is a lot of the time where they are in the real world. And honestly, I think that would be a really easy thing to put on a slider, because if you think about it, the slider could just move left and right, and so could the position of the stack. So I feel like that would be something that would be simple for the developers to interface and also simple enough for them to add in an update. Now, keep in mind, I am not personally a developer, so I don't know the entire process that goes into this stuff. I'm sure it involves several tweaks and changes that they would have to make. However, it also doesn't seem like all that big of a deal. And I also think it's something that would just overall improve the experience of the players dramatically, because it would give you a little bit more control over how your truck, honestly, just how your truck turns out. And I know a lot of people tend to suggest semi-trucks as well. However, the issue that I think we run into with semi-trucks, and the developers have talked about this a little bit as well, is that semi-trucks tend to create a little bit of a resource usage concern, because obviously they are so large for one, and also the way they would need to interface with everything else in the game would require that they consume a lot of resources, RAM I'm sure in particular, from your device, that would not necessarily be the friendliest to players on older devices, which I'm sure that the Offroad Outlaws developers are trying their best to keep the game as universally playable as possible, because nobody necessarily wants to worry about not being able to play a game that they enjoy anymore because it's just too intensive for their device to run. We see this with other mobile games sometimes, like for example, CarX Street, which is really innovative for a mobile game. However, it's really, really hard for a lot of devices to run it, and some devices can't even view it on their app store simply because they just don't have the power to, like, their device just doesn't pass the usage requirements test. And that's something we always have to remember when we think about what features could be added to Offroad Outlaws in the future, because the more features and vehicles and elements that do get added, the more resources that can cause the game to hog. So keeping that in mind, there's a lot that still needs to be done in terms of making sure the game would run smoothly if vehicles that were that much larger and that more intensive to actually render than a lot of the other vehicles. There would be a lot of work on the back end that I think would need to be done prior to that. Now, of course, you might say, well, off the road, has semi-trucks. In fact, I think it has multiple. And to that, I would say Off the Road runs on an entirely different system. At least I believe it runs on an entirely different system and an entirely different back end. So I don't think you can necessarily compare. I don't think Offroad Outlaws versus Off the Road is any kind of apples to apples comparison. I think they need to be compared. If you're going to compare the two, I think they definitely need to be compared like for their own differences and understanding that they run in different ways. And that's not to say that one of them is better than the other. I just know that me personally, I have found Offroad Outlaws to be more fun and engaging than Off the Road. And I've also found Offroad Outlaws to have a little bit more choice in terms of what the player can actually do when it comes to getting their vehicles actually set up the way they want them. And the customization features, I think they definitely swing a lot further in Offroad Outlaws' favor. But enough talking about other games. Going back to the Future of Offroad Outlaws updates, I definitely think it's also important to mention character customization, because with how many people use Offroad Outlaws as a roleplay experience, I think deepening the character customization system would honestly be really nice to see, because there's a lot of times where the character models that you see in other online sessions, I mean, you are going to eventually run into a situation or a scenario where 2 or 3 other players' characters look almost identical to yours. And that's not necessarily bad, but I do think it would kind of be, I feel like it would kind of be nice for the player base to actually have a little bit more control over how their actual player character looks in the game. Because if you think about it, honestly, if you think about it, even the weapons have a little bit more customization options than the characters. And like, I know that the characters are more of a vehicle for just being able to walk around. They're not necessarily a primary focus. Although I think players would appreciate having a little more customization choice. And I would love for y'all to weigh in on that with your own opinions in the comments down below, because character customization, or rather improved character customization, doesn't seem to be something that comes up all that often when talking about Offroad Outlaws. But I think at the same time, I think it's something that players would really appreciate. But let me know in the comments below if that's something that you would appreciate, or if it's not really all that important to you and you would rather the developers focus on other things. Moving on, we are going to address this just once, because we have to address this in every Offroad Outlaws update video that we do until it eventually gets added, and that is that we need a 3rd gen Dodge quad cab. Okay, now that we've mentioned that, we can move on. Plus, I also know that if I don't address that, I'll get multiple comments saying, why didn't you mention a quad cab 3rd gen? Because that's something that we've been needing forever. And honestly, I'm surprised that we didn't get one back around the same time that we got the Cat Eye, because I know that we technically do have a 3rd gen, but not only is the 3rd gen 3D model pretty old and looks pretty old next to some of the other 3D models, but I feel like when you have the option of a quad cab, that's what a lot of players will usually go for. And I think that a lot of players would really be a fan of having a quad cab 3rd gen. And as we think about the Future of Offroad Outlaws updates, it's also really important to remember how long this game has truly been around for. Because if you think about it, this game has been around honestly longer than a lot of the games we play on consoles. It's been around for longer than some popular AAA games, and it's gone through many revisions and many improvements over time that have honestly taken this game through so many different revisions. Because I mean, hell, I remember playing it when there were almost no trucks in the game compared to what there are now. And I would love to see a RAM usage and file size comparison from when I first started playing the game to what the game actually takes up on a device now, because I would love to see how much they've actually been able to optimize within the game to actually keep it playable on older devices while continuing to add so much content over the years. because for that reason, the game really does fascinate me in a lot of ways, because honestly, it's had so much staying power. Even when you compare it to other games that people play on PC and consoles, like this game has remained such a constant in people's lives. And of course, one last thing that I would like to add to my own personal features wish list for the future of Offroad Outlaws is honestly not just to see more new vehicles added, but to see some of the older vehicles that maybe aren't quite on the same level as the new ones either remastered or have new versions of those released, and then the old versions maybe removed from the game in order to save on resources and game performance, so that once again, users on older systems don't necessarily have to fall behind quite as much. So with all of that being said and done, let me know any and all suggestions or opinions y'all might have regarding what you would like to see in the next Offroad Outlaws video, and your comment may actually make it into the next video where we talk about the upcoming updates for this game again. So that's gonna do it for this one, y'all, and I'll see y'all next time.